Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD physician. I'm not a cardiologist. Today we'll be discussing on one of the another interesting topic we call it the pulmonary embolism, which is common, and the most common cause for pulmonary embolism is DVT. So little portion of DVT also we'll be discussing together. And regarding DVT, we'll be discussing separately in a separate lecture. Pulmonary embolism can be acute, can be chronic thromboembolic phenomena. So, whenever an embolus from a different sites enters into pulmonary artery and it occludes the pulmonary circulation, we'll call that as pulmonary embolism. As routine, we'll be discussing under definition, etiology, pathophysiology, clinical features, investigations, differential diagnosis, treatment and complications. So by definition, pulmonary embolism is acute occlusion of pulmonary arterial circulation by an embolus. And this embolus may be a clot, we call blood clot, maybe tumor, maybe air, maybe a fat material, maybe a nitrogen molecule, and then we call that as a Caisson's disease, maybe a parasite, maybe amniotic fluid, or maybe infected material like pus in case of infective endocarditis. Now what is an embolus? Embolus is a material. By and large it is made up of a clot which is dislodged from its primary origin site and blocks the blood vessel at a distal sites which is smaller than the size of a embolus. To classify them, one, depending on the size. If it is a small size, it can be single or multiple. But by and large, when it is a big size, it is a single embolus. But being a big size, it is called as a massive embolism. Depending upon the content, air, blood clot, malignant cells, pus cells, fat, amniotic fluid, nitrogen gas or nitrogen bubble, in Caisson's disease, parasites like cysticercosis, hydatid cyst, foreign body, that is tip of the catheter, etc. can be there. So these are all the different material which can produce. So depending upon the content of embolus, you can classify according to that. And then it is classified depending upon the stages or depending upon the different varieties of embolism. One, massive pulmonary embolism. Second, submassive pulmonary embolism. Minor pulmonary embolism. And last group we call pulmonary infarct. So these are the different categories which are being described. So it can be thrombotic, non-thrombotic. In a thrombotic, it can be acute and can be chronic. By and large, the most common cause of acute or chronic is by deep vein thrombosis, DVT. Very rarely you come across an embolus from systemic going into pulmonary circulation if there is a reversal of the shunt or if there is a left to right shunt. Then from LA or LV, it can enter onto the right side and can enter into pulmonary circulation. Rare combination, but can be there. While in a non-thrombotic episodes or non-thrombotic pulmonary embolism, fat, air, amniotic fluid, tumor, parasites, nitrogen, gas, etc. This will be few groups. Etiology wise, as far as a blood clot is concerned, the most common site is DVT, that is deep vein thrombosis, mainly from lower limb. Very rarely we come across venous thrombosis in upper limb, not a common cause. From right atrium or right ventricle, In this again, a big right atrial enlargement, RVMI, pulmonary stenosis, tricuspid stenosis, tricuspid regurgitation with infective endocarditis, or in a person with drug addicts also you can get infective endocarditis on right side. This will be some of the group which can produce thromboembolism from right side entering into pulmonary circulation. And when it comes from the left side, that is from systemic circulation into pulmonary circulation, we call paradoxical, and that is very common in person with left to right shunt and in case of reversal of the shunt. Very rare, very rare in a reversal of the shunt, not very common. Infective material will be very common in infective endocarditis, and another common group where you get a Mycobacterium tubercle as an embolus material in case of miliary tuberculosis, which comes mainly from lung. Air embolism will be very common in case of tension pneumothorax and person who is on a heart-lung machine during CABG or while giving IV fluids or while giving a large dose of IV injections, air bubble will enter, or on a what we call as a non-invasive ventilation like BiPAP or PPV, positive pressure ventilation. Parasite embolism will be common in hydatid cyst and cysticercosis. Amniotic fluid during postpartum period. Malignant cells metastasis. Nitrogen in case of Caisson's disease. And fat embolism in case of a long bone fractures, post-surgical on abdomen, following a surgery on abdomen, liver, breast tissue, or a surgery on long bones. We divide into two big groups, thrombotic and non-thrombotic. Non-thrombotic is fair, air, nitrogen, tumor, pus, amniotic fluid, parasites, etc. Thrombus, most common cause of thrombus is from deep vein thrombosis. 90% are from there, from the vein of the leg above the knee, and upper limb are very rare. If it comes from heart, it is usually the word utilized is cardiac thromboembolism. And cardiac thromboembolism is very frequently from right side in case of inferior wall infarct or RVMI. Or infective endocarditis will be infective material which will be from the right side in case of tricuspid stenosis, tricuspid regurgitation, pulmonary stenosis, in drug addicts, in a case of atrial flutter fibrillation because of big right atrial enlargement in case of TR or TS, and then you can get thromboembolism. This will be all we call as a cardioembolic phenomena. And rare, we have already mentioned before, paradoxical embolization means a blood clot comes from systemic circulation onto the pulmonary circulation because of left to right shunt or because of reversal of the shunt. And whenever there is a reversal of the shunt, by and large, the clot will be from right side only. So the commonest cause of clot we already mentioned by DVT, it will come from this area. It is usually above the knee. 90% of the clots are from that because this vein is bigger enough, or may come from cardiac. And in cardiac, right ventricular infarct, septic embolization coming from right side because of tricuspid stenosis, tricuspid regurgitation, or pulmonary stenosis. And also you can get an embolus because of fat, air, amniotic fluid, metastasis, etc., which can be there and can pass through venous system into the pulmonary circulation. This will be very common. Air embolism, we have already mentioned, it is very commonly while giving IV drips or while giving IV injection of large dose, etc. While fat embolism will be very common if you are doing a surgery on abdomen, liver, breast tissue or a long bones, or because of massive fracture you can have a fat embolization. These are the different conditions which can produce fat embolization. As far as DVT is concerned, it is called Virchow's triad, which will end up with a thrombus formation in a venous circulation because of venous stasis, or because of vessel wall injury, or because of hypercoagulability stage, and that can end up with thrombosis. Some of the common cause will be showing you here, which we'll be discussing in detail. Hypercoagulable state, the most common is because of oral contraceptive pills, malignancy, post-surgical, during pregnancy, etc. Because of vessel wall injury, the commonest cause as far as the venous injury is concerned is because of IV fluids or IV injections, and very rarely it is because of trauma. Immobilization becomes a very common cause in case of obesity, fracture of hip and lower limb, immobilization, major surgery on abdomen, on hip, or person is immobilized because of spinal cord injury, paraplegia, or person is hospitalized and is in a supine posture or immobilized for a long period. Also, immobilization is very common when the person goes for a very long travel, particularly long flights or long travel in bus, car, etc. So hypercoagulated state most common is malignancy, pregnancy, postpartum period, oral contraceptive pills, factor 5, protein C, protein S deficiency, or factor 8 deficiency. Venous stasis, very common when the person is bedridden for a long period, person is having plaster, external fixation, or is undergone major surgery. We have already mentioned long travel, prolonged automobile travel, etc. And venous injury, not very common, but recent surgery requiring endotracheal intubation, or recent trauma on lower extremity or on a pelvic region. These are all the other conditions which are predisposing, like history of varicose vein, MI, malignancy, atrial fibrillation, ischemic stroke, diabetes, obesity, pregnancy, etc. We already mentioned this. There are two basic reasons, one genetic factor and one acquired factors. In acquired factors, you can come across in genetic factor, factor 5 deficiency, anticoagulant deficiency like factor 8, prothrombin abnormality. As far as acquired risk factor, age, previous thromboembolism, deep vein thrombosis, cancer, obesity, varicose vein, oral contraceptive pills. Triggering factor can be pregnancy, surgery, immobilization, trauma, long air travels, etc. So these are all the risk factors we have already mentioned. Some are additional. At your leisure time you can go through. These are all the other risk factors we have already mentioned before: long term immobility, chronic pulmonary disease, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, varicose vein, recent surgery, advanced age, oral contraceptive pills or hormone replacement therapy, pregnancy, burns, obesity, malignancy, etc. So these are all predisposing factors. You can go through your at leisure time. We have already mentioned regarding the etiology part. Any one of those etiology can produce thrombus formation, either because of venous stasis or because of the endothelial damage or because of stasis. Person will have a very high hypercoagulability stage, and person will have a very high chance of development of the venous thrombus, which can dislodge and travel through the venous system into the right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary circulation, and can produce pulmonary embolism. Once there is a pulmonary embolism, there is an increased vascular resistance. Because of increased vascular resistance, pulmonary hypertension, right ventricle will have to work against increased afterload, in which right ventricle pressure will increase. Right ventricle will try to compensate by undergoing hypertrophy. If it is massive and acute, the right ventricle will not get chance to undergo compensation, and there will be increased right ventricular pressure, right atrial pressure, and person will go into congestive cardiac failure or increased pressure in superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. We call that as a congestive cardiac failure, and this will be acute cor pulmonale. Secondary due to occlusion of the pulmonary artery, there is impaired gas exchange, alveolar hyperventilation, increased airway resistance, hypoxia. Because of hypoxia, bronchoconstriction. Secondary due to that, again there will be pulmonary vasoconstriction leading to further elevation of vascular resistance, decreased pulmonary compliance, and because of persistent occlusion, now there will be a pulmonary infarct, and that portion which has infarcted will not be functioning. So there will be decreased ventilation, and because of decreased ventilation, there will be hypoxia. And secondary to pulmonary infarct, there will be hemoptysis, dyspnea, tachypnea, cyanosis, and there will be severe hypoxia. And when there is a massive and acute infarct, it will lead to acute cor pulmonale. But if there are small microinfarcts, secondary due to chronic thromboembolic phenomena, because there are small size embolus which are dislodged, it will lead to chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension. Secondary to this, RV will try to compensate by hypertrophy and RV dilatation. RV pressure will be elevated and diastolic pressure will be elevated. Right atrial pressure will be elevated, and then person will go into failure. We'll call that as a chronic cor pulmonale. And in case of an acute cor pulmonale, if treatment is not given properly, person can develop respiratory failure, which will be hypoxic, hypercapnic respiratory failure, and person can die. So this will be the entire pathophysiology. So this is a diagram which is showing you how the clot formation takes place, how the embolus comes, and how it will block the pulmonary artery. So embolus will come from deep vein, will get dislodged, comes to the pulmonary artery, and it will block the smaller size artery. If it is big enough, it may block even the main. Then we call that as a saddle embolus, single saddle embolus. And because of that embolism, now you have got an occlusion of pulmonary artery, hypoxia, vasoconstriction, decrease in surfactant, release of neurohormonal system or neurohormonal mechanism will work. It will produce vasoconstriction further, as well as there will be release of inflammatory substance. There will be pulmonary edema. Because of decrease in surfactant, there will be atelectasis, and all this condition will increase the lung compliance, decrease the lung compliance, tachypnea, dyspnea, chest pain, increased dead space, VQ imbalance, decreased arterial oxygen, severe hypoxia, pulmonary infarct, secondary to pulmonary infarct, hemoptysis, pulmonary hypertension, decreased cardiac output, systemic hypotension because less blood comes to LA, and from LA to LV less blood will come, and person can even develop shock stage. All this will be part and parcel of a pathophysiology in entire cycle. We are not going to deal regarding a left heart disease. If it is because of a left heart disease, only in case of a left to right shunt, you can have a paradoxical embolization. Very rarely in case of a reversal of the shunt, very rare, absolutely rare, you can develop a right side embolus, thrombus, and you can end up with a thromboembolic phenomena, not very common. So already the things is being explained before, the same thing is shown here. Because of occlusion, anatomical obstruction or neurohormonal effect, vasoconstriction, vasospasm, pulmonary arterial pressure elevated after load on RV is elevated, will result into RV stress, right ventricular hypertrophy, increased RV demand, RV ischemia, right ventricular dysfunction and dilatation, decrease RV oxygen supply, decrease coronary perfusion, and that will be partly because of even RV wall pressure on RV wall is increased, or we call tension is increased, and that can also produce decreased coronary perfusion and increased demand. RV dilatation and dysfunction will reduce cardiac output. There will be shift of interventricular septum towards left side, and that will also decrease further cardiac output, decrease LV preload, decrease LV output, and that can produce decreased cardiac output, decreased systemic perfusion, hypotension, and hypotension will further reduce coronary perfusion, and there will be systemic circulation will be cold clammy, hypotension, and shock stage. This is the entire picture of what we call as a passive pulmonary embolism. If it is acute and massive, it will develop very sharp, very early, even before the right ventricle undergoes compensation. But if it is small and gradual, multiple small embolus, the RV will get a chance to undergo remodeling, or we call compensation. And once the RV undergoes compensation, you will have a RVH, RV dilatation followed by congestive cardiac failure. So RV dilatation, tricuspid regurgitation, RV wall tension, neurohormonal activation, myocardial damage because of the inflammatory mediators, RV demand is increased, demand is not met with decreased cardiac output, decreased coronary perfusion, RV ischemia, decrease in RV contractility, decreased RV output. Because of decreased RV output, LV preload is less, low cardiac output into systemic, fall of blood pressure, shock stage, RV perfusion is reduced, and it goes into that circle, and there will be what we call as an irreversible cardiac failure, and that will be very, very common. So this is entirely explained in one single picture, the entire what we have shown you here in these different pictures. Same thing shown here. Because of obstruction, what happens? Because of vasoconstriction, ischemia, RV decompensation, and because of neurohormonal mechanism also, what takes place? And final is LV preload is reduced, decreased cardiac output, and person will go into a shock stage. And if not treated early, person can even die. So person can be asymptomatic or symptomatic. By and large, the person will be asymptomatic if it is a very single embolus and very, very small size. We call it a microembolus. By and large, we divide depending upon the number, single or multiple. Size wise, micro or big single massive embolus, we call it a saddle embolus. And depending upon the distribution of embolus, how many embolus comes at a time. And there are different stages, we call it a pulmonary infarct, minor pulmonary embolism, submassive, and massive. So these are the four varieties of presentation. So we'll be going through that. So whenever there is a pulmonary embolism, the onset is always sudden. If it is significant enough, single, big size, or multiple, many embolus, then it can be sudden onset of dyspnea, tachycardia, and you will have a symptom signs of congestive cardiac failure. So that will be there. So in an acute variety,
Also is included in the literature that PE has a range of
you will have
presentations
clinically
depending on the
unimportant
size of
incidental
size
variety
of embolus.
or
Usually
minor
large
embolus
causing more
which
dyspnea,
can produce
minor
infarct,
embolic
which will have
causing
hemoptysis,
hemoptysis,
pleuritic pain or pleural pulmonary
hemoptysis,
signs.
and also pleuritic
Large
pain,
embolus can produce
and the
severe
massive emboli
dyspnea, and
leading
massive
to
embolus can produce ischemic
cardiac
pain
collapse.
and cardiovascular collapse. So this can be the presentation in acute pulmonary embolism, 4 different groups: asymptomatic, minor emboli with infarct, large emboli with massive infarct, and massive emboli with almost cardiac collapse. So symptoms can be ranging from dyspnea, chest pain, apprehension, cough, hemoptysis, syncope, palpitation, wheezing, leg pains, leg swelling because of deep vein thrombosis, etc. And clinically you will have a tachycardia, tachypnea, symptom signs of hypoxia, cyanosis, P2 loud, fever, diaphoresis, and on cardiovascular examination, TR murmur, JVP will be elevated, you will have a central cyanosis, and person may be also in hypotension or a shock stage. So you will have a wide variety of presentation, right from minor who are almost asymptomatic to a severe where person can come to you in a cardiogenic shock. So the most common symptom, if you consider, usually in what we call as massive infarct or a submassive infarct, dyspnea at rest or with exertion, almost in 73% of the people. Pleuritic pain is common in 44%. Cough is very common in 34% of group. Very rarely a person who gets a massive infarct may come to you with a dyspnea at rest and almost orthopneic posture, 28%. By and large, they don't come with an orthopneic posture. A person who has got a deep vein thrombosis as a primary etiology, then they will have a thigh pain, calf muscle swelling, almost in 44 to 41% of the group. Because of a bronchoconstriction, wheezing, and dyspnea onset will be within second in 46% and within minutes in 26%. As far as signs are concerned, tachypnea and tachycardia comes topmost on the list. And because of infarct, in an infarcted area, you might come across rales and decreased breath sounds because of the collapse of the lung. You will have a P2 loud, second heart sound will be loud. You may get TR murmur in case of a congestive heart failure. Jugular venous pressure may be elevated. So this is a list which is showing you that dyspnea, pleuritic pain is the maximum. You can see here that is maximum. Cough, hemoptysis are less, and respiratory signs you can come across, particularly tachycardia and P2 loud will be another common sign which you can find out by doing an auscultation. By and large, we always use the word classical triad, that is hemoptysis, dyspnea and pleuritic pain comes as a classical triad, and it is believed to be almost positive in 20% of the patient with documented pulmonary embolism. So in another 80% it can be depending upon the severity, that is pulmonary infarct, minor pulmonary embolism, submassive embolism and massive embolism. In a massive pulmonary embolism, usually the person will come to you with a severe hypotension and shock stage. Means person will have a severe dyspnea, central cyanosis, JVP will be elevated, extremities will be cold clammy, and sometime even the person may come to you with a cardiac arrest. And on ECG you might get a pulmonary. On an ECG you can get what we call is a pulseless electrical activity or electrico-mechanical dissociation. So you will have a normal ECG, but pulse, blood pressure will be absent. There will be no contraction of a myocardium. And this is one of the findings which you can come across in a massive pulmonary embolism. So hypotension, shock stage, clinical finding we call as a cardiogenic shock. And on an ECG, you get a cardiac arrest or pulseless electrical activity, that is a normal ECG pattern without any ventricular contraction, means heart sounds are absent. So that will be classical presentation. In a submassive variety, blood pressure may be normal. RV signs of dysfunction is present on an echocardiography, and person might have dyspnea, may have cyanosis, JVP may be slightly elevated, but blood pressure is close to normal. In a minor pulmonary embolism, blood pressure is normal, RV function is also normal on echocardiography. And in a case of a pulmonary infarct, there is a very small size of infarct, And along with that, person usually complain of pleuritic pain because of involvement of the peripheral pleura. So person will have a small infarct with pleurus. That will be pulmonary infarct. And sometimes it is very difficult to detect in a pulmonary infarct because it is a very small size infarct. Mainly pleuritic pain will be there for a short period and person will recover. So this is what we have mentioned together: massive, submassive, small to moderate variety, paradoxical embolization, etc. And paradoxical embolization will be very common if there is a PFO. PFO we call as a atrial septal defect. Small emboli, large emboli, small emboli, rapid onset. You might have a little dyspnea, tachycardia, tachypnea, depending upon the number of emboli. Usually you will have a showers of emboli, large number of emboli, and person will have a very common history of DVT, etc. And very rarely they develop acute variety. By and large, they get chronic thromboembolic phenomena ending up with a pulmonary hypertension. They will end up very rarely with acute. While a large emboli, a single emboli, will end up with what we call as an acute episodes. By and large, in a small emboli, you will come across pleuritic pain. Sorry, this should be collected. Small emboli symptom signs will be, this is not large, this should be small. So small emboli will usually give rise to a small infarcts. Pleuritic pain will be there, pleural rub will be found. Person might have a history of dry cough, and occasionally person can have hemoptysis. That is rare, not common. So this will be typical finding what you can come across in a small emboli. And usually in a very large emboli, there is a massive infarct, and massive infarct will be associated with an acute right side failure without decompensation. So right ventricle doesn't get a chance to compensate. So before a right ventricle undergoes hypertrophy and dilatation, person goes into a failure, and you will have a cardiogenic shock, and even a person can go into cardiac arrest. And on an ECG you can get a pulseless electrical activity. That finding you can come across. And if a person has not gone into a cardiac arrest, then you can have S1Q3 T3 on an ECG with right axis deviation and sometimes even right bundle branch block, or you can have what we call as JVP elevated. You can have severe shock stage in the form of peripheral pulse, low volume, cold clammy extremity, mixed cyanosis, central as well as peripheral cyanosis. The peripheral cyanosis is because of severe decrease in the cardiac output and cardiogenic shock. All this finding can be together in case of a very large emboli. To find out a person is having a DVT, there is one score called as a Wells criteria score, where for clinical symptoms and signs of DVT you give 3 points. Alternative diagnosis likely then pulmonary embolism, 3 points. Heart rate more than 100, 1.5 points. Immobilized for a long period, or surgery done in previous 4 weeks, 1.5. Previous history of DVT or previous history of pulmonary embolism, again 1.5, 1.5. Hemoptysis 1. And if a past history of malignancy or person is receiving chemotherapy or radiotherapy in past 6 months, or person has undergone a palliative care for malignancy, 1 point. And when you got more than 6 points, it straightforward goes in favor of pulmonary embolism. If it is between 2 to 6, there is a medium risk of thromboembolism. And if there is less than 2 points, there is a very less chance of getting pulmonary thromboembolism. So Wells score or Wells criteria is usually utilized Now there is something called as a modified Wales score. Two-level pulmonary embolism Wales score, etc. is being utilized. You can go through at your leisure time. These are you can go through at leisure time where if it is points are more than 4, pulmonary embolism is more likely. If less than 4, unlikely. If it is more than 6, high risk, which is there by Wales criteria. And if it is less than 2, low risk score. Between 2 to 6, moderate risk score. So this is that Wales score. And if you go through a Wales criteria and have a modified criteria, this particularly, then you can utilize this score, and depending upon that score you can say pulmonary embolism more likely if it is more than 4, and if it is less than 4, less likely. You can utilize those particular criteria. So always utilize Wales score to find out and suspect whether there is a possibility or not. So if the score is more than 4, pulmonary embolism is likely. Straightforward, you can go for a pulmonary angiography with CT scan. See, we call CT pulmonary angiography. Or you can go for a D-dimer study. If the Wales score is less than 4, and if a D-dimer is more than 500, then straightforward you can go for pulmonary angiography, CT pulmonary angiography. And if a D-dimer study shows less than 500, then pulmonary embolism is excluded. So if a person has got score less than 4 in Wales score and D-dimer is negative, or we call less than 500, then it is less likely to be pulmonary embolism. And these are all that particular you can go through. D-dimer study, then you can go for an X-ray chest, etc. So go through your at leisure time, VQ scan, etc. can be done. So D-dimer is very important to just suspect and rule out. If D-dimer is negative or we call low score, then the risk is very less. You can observe, or you can say less chance of pulmonary embolism. And D-dimer is strongly positive, more than 500. Then you will have to undergo what we call as a deep vein thrombosis. You want to confirm, you can go for an ultrasound, or we call as a duplex ultrasound with duplex study. You can go for pulmonary angiography with CT, or you can go for VQ scan. So these are the 3 common tests which are very essential in case of a pulmonary thromboembolism. These are all the different charts which are being there. In a suspected case, what you do, how you proceed further. We have already mentioned before. Same thing is shown but in little more detail. This is also same in a suspected thromboembolism. This is Geneva score. How you utilize that Geneva score. This is that Geneva score, simplified Geneva score. This is revised Geneva score. This is PERC rule. This is ACR criteria, etc. Now DVT clinical presentation we have already mentioned before. You will have a pain in a calf muscle, swelling in the calf muscle, redness. You will have a varicose vein. You might have a varicose ulcer, infection, or you might have a gangrene secondary due to varicose vein. We call phlegmasia cerula dolens. And secondary to that, now if a person comes to with a dyspnea, calf hemoptysis, then you suspect pulmonary embolism, secondary due to DVT. And certain signs like Homan signs, where when you do a dorsiflexion at ankle, the person will complain of pain in calf region. Mosses sign or a Pret sign is because of squeezing of calf muscle. Don't do that, because it can dislodge a thrombus and can end up with pulmonary embolism. This test should not be done as far as possible. If clinically it is enough, don't try to do those squeezing of the calf muscle or repeated dorsiflexion at ankle joint. Just even if you touch the calf muscle and if it is severely tender, no need to do Homan's test or a Mosses test or Bancroft signs or Lowenberg signs, etc. These are all the different tests which wants to prove that there is a deep vein thrombosis. And while doing those particular tests, you are likely to dislodge thrombus and produce thromboembolic phenomena. As far as the risk factor is concerned, you will have to identify by doing clinical signs like hypotension and shock. If that is present, it is a very high risk group. If it is negative, there is no shock, blood pressure is close to normal, maybe a medium risk or a low risk. If on an echo you get an RV dysfunction, more in favor of high risk, less chances of. In case of a medium risk, you can have RV dysfunction, but in a low risk, RV dysfunction is almost, RV function is normal. Evidence of myocardial injury will be present good number of time in case of a high risk and medium risk, but in a case of a low risk, it is negative. And potential treatment for this in a high risk, you have to give a thrombolysis and embolectomy. While in case of a medium risk, you will require a hospitalization and anticoagulation. While in a low risk, you can go for a home treatment. This will be, usually we try to identify by that. The main important test is a D-dimer. If D-dimer is more than 500, suspect pulmonary embolism. If D-dimer is less, chances of DVT, thrombus formation is less likely. Then you go for the other parameters. In ECG, if you get a S1Q3T3 pattern with RBBB, also look for RVMI. It will be very strongly positive in case of a massive embolus. Echocardiography, if it shows an RV dysfunction, again it is more in favor of massive embolus or submassive embolus. X-ray chest showing you a clear-cut Westmark sign or Hampton's hump, again it is in favor of a massive embolus or massive infarct. Chest CT, HR CT, spiral CT with pulmonary angiography will be very useful to confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. VQ scan is also helpful to find out the severity of pulmonary infarct. ABG will give you an idea regarding how severe the hypoxia, hypercapnia, or also it will give you the idea regarding the effect, prognosis, etc. So pulmonary angiography combined with MR or CT or combined with spiral CT will be very helpful to confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism and pulmonary infarct. To confirm the diagnosis of DVT, Doppler, we call colored Doppler, duplex Doppler, ultrasound. Very rarely we require a venography, and venography is needed while doing a surgical intervention or while doing a intervention therapy for DVT. So these are all the different investigation which are necessary. As far as imaging study is concerned, chest X-ray, where you will get a Hampton's hump or Westmark sign, VQ scan, spiral CT, pulmonary angio combined with spiral CT or MRI, echocardiography, etc. As far as laboratory parameter is concerned, main important is D-dimer and ABG. We already mentioned D-dimer more than 500 is more in favor of pulmonary embolism rather than less than 500. ABG will give you idea regarding the severity of hypoxia, severity of hypercapnia, etc. and it will be very useful while finding out the prognosis during treatment. ECG is an additional investigation which will give you an idea regarding what we call as a right ventricular dysfunction. If you get S1Q3T3 pattern with RVMI, it is in favor of a severe massive infarct. Or if there is only RVH, there is tachycardia, there is no S1Q3T3 pattern, there is no RVMI, it will be very commonly in a case of a chronic cor pulmonale. Pulse oximetry will be helpful to find out the severity of hypoxia. BNP, pro-BNP will be elevated in case of an acute cor pulmonale. So BNP, if it is markedly elevated, it is more in favor of an acute cor pulmonale. So threshold again is more than 500, it is more sensitive. ABG, we have already told you, it is not 100% confirmatory, but severe hypoxia, hypocapnia, secondary due to massive embolus. It will be producing respiratory alkalosis, and it will be also useful for finding out the prognosis. So first line is EKG, echocardiography. Second line is venous ultrasound, venous Doppler, color Doppler, or we call color duplex. CT angio combined with pulmonary angio, that is spiral CT with pulmonary angio. Those are more helpful. VQ scan you can go for. So these are all what investigation you can go for. D-dimer test is useful, very helpful. Always also keep it in mind, D-dimer can be false positive in many conditions like cancer, inflammation, post-operative condition, pregnancy, trauma, old age, etc. So it can give you a false positive results. So you must keep that thing in mind. And these are some of the conditions which are predisposing to what we call as a DVT. So always keep that thing in mind. On chest X-ray, we have shown you Westmark sign and Hampton sum is very important. So this will be Westmark sign, which will be close to the hilum. You can have other appearance depending upon the severity of the damage. I am not going into detail. You can see atelectasis, pleural effusion, pleural based opacity, elevated diaphragm because of collapse, prominent central pulmonary artery we call as a Westmark sign, cardiomegaly, pulmonary edema, Hampton sum, etc. All those findings you can come across. There are other names also given to some of the signs like Fletcher signs, Pala signs, Hampton sum, all those signs name are given. Westmark sign is at the hilum and Hampton sum is at the periphery. That is because of the infarct. Westmark sign is because of occlusion of the pulmonary artery, and distal to that occlusion there will be no vascular marking. You can see here. Here you can see the vascular marking. Here after this occlusion there is decreased vascular marking. That is Westmark sign. Very clear. And in Hampton sum, this is the area where there is a lung infarct, pulmonary infarct. So it will be a pleural based opacity, which will be because of the pulmonary infarct, and there is a massive embolus here, and that is given a name, Hampton sum. This is called Hampton sum, and this which is at the hilum we call Westmark sign. So this will be Westmark sign, and that will be because of dilated pulmonary artery and no vascular marking in this region. At that particular area you get a sign which is called as a Pala sign. This is knuckle sign also called. So these are different names given to the different types of signs because of pulmonary. This is called Fletcher lines. You can have cavitation, pleural effusion, no air bronchogram, and that disappears. We call melting sign. As soon as the healing starts, those particular shadow disappears. It is called melting sign. Different name given. If an expert looks at it, he will be able to pick up. We have already given you regarding an EKG two specific difference in acute cor pulmonar. You will have a S1Q3 T3 pattern, that is S wave in lead 1 and Q wave in lead 3 and T3 in lead 3. T will be inverted in lead 3. Along with that, you might have a right axis deviation, right bundle branch block pattern, and you can have a P pulmonar. In a severe massive infarct, person can even develop what we call as a cardiac arrest, and in that you can have a cardiac arrest in the form of a straight line, or you can have in a form of a we call pulseless electrical activity, PEA, pulseless electrical activity, where pulse, heart sounds are absent, pulse is absent, blood pressure is not recordable, but on an ECG you see a normal QRS complex. That is very common because there is an acute decrease in blood supply to the myocardium. So this is typical, we call as a S wave in 1, lead 1, and Q in lead 3, and T wave inverted in lead 3. That's why it is called S1, Q wave in lead 3 and T wave inverted in lead 3. This is showing you that there is a right ventricular strain which is taking place. So S1, Q3, T3 is typical, very, very typical. And you start getting even what we call as an ischemic changes. You can have a ischemic changes and even you can develop a RVMI. So lead 1 and lead 3 will be having a change. In a precordial lead, you can have a tall T wave and you can have a RV infarct size signs. So once in a while you can develop that T wave inversion you can have in lead 3 and you can have also in chest leads. Right bundle branch block pattern can be one of the presentation. Right ventricular strain pattern can be there. You can have a R wave in V1 with T wave inversion. We have already told you when you do a Doppler for leg veins or you go for a Doppler duplex, you can find out a deep vein thrombosis. Venous ultrasound will be useful, but if you combine Doppler with color Doppler or color Doppler duplex, it will be more beneficial. Echocardiography will show you RV dysfunction present or absent, and sudden elevation of pulmonary pressure will be also in favor of that. So in an echo sign, there is one sign which is called as a RV enlargement with hypokinesia. It is called McConnell sign, and that is very important. So echocardiography will show you RV dysfunction, TR, RV thrombus, McConnell sign, then pulmonary hypertension, tricuspid regurgitation, etc. will be seen. You can have a RV dilatation. This will be seen more in a chronic rather than acute. In a case of an acute, pulmonary pressure will be elevated, RV pressure will be elevated, there will be RV dysfunction, etc. But you may not have a RVH. VQ scan will be helpful. Spiral CT with pulmonary angio will be also helpful. So pulmonary angio, you can have a different signs. They are given different name. Polo mint signs. You know very well this polo. So it looks like that polo. This polo mint. So it looks like that. That's why it is given a name. Polo mint sign. You can have a railway track signs, etc. These are all the different signs which you can come across in pulmonary angio. You can go for also dual energy CTPA, that is CT pulmonary angio, and that will give you much better idea. It is electrocardiographically gated CTPA is also helpful. We have already mentioned the importance of biomarkers like BNP and terminal pro-BNP, troponin. You can go for even a FABP, growth differentiation factors 15. These are newer which has come up, but most commonly we utilize troponin, BNP and terminal pro-BNP. These are most commonly which are being utilized. Differential diagnosis, by and large, there should not be a differential diagnosis if a good history is taken and you go for a good investigations, you confirm the diagnosis of pulmonary embolism. Management will be anticoagulation to further decrease the chance of thrombosis and thromboembolism. Fibrinola is taken to dissolve the clot and embolus. If embolus is not lysed, you can go for embolectomy. To prevent a second episode, you can go for a IVC filter, that is intravascular filter. You put it into the inferior vena cava because the most common cause of thromboembolism is a deep vein thrombosis in lower limb. So you put a filter in a inferior vena cava, so the embolus will be filtered out there. And then you will have to give a DVT prophylaxis. By and large, the general measures for an infarct, pulmonary infarct, monitoring oxygen, fluid, inotropes in a person who has developed a cardiogenic shock. Anticoagulation, you can use heparin or low molecular weight heparin or vitamin K related warfarin. Thrombolysis is very commonly utilized if there is a massive pulmonary embolism. And we have already told you that a person who has developed a severe shock stage, all these things has to be together. You have to give an inotropes, oxygen fluids, you have to have a monitor, ABG recording, etc. Along with that, you will have to do removal of embolus, and simultaneously fibrinolysis should be done. That's why it is together called as chemico-mechanical intervention. Chemical is fibrinolytic, mechanical is embolectomy. So two things can be, or they call mechanico-chemical intervention. Depending upon what is being required, you can do at the level of deep vein thrombosis both together, and also same thing can be done at the level of pulmonary artery, where you can do embolectomy combined with thrombolysis. These are all the different measures. So symptomatic treatment, ABCD approach, A for airway, B for breathing, C for cardiovascular supports, and D for what we call as a, sorry I forgot that, oxygen, analgesia, anticoagulation like heparin. If I remember, I'll just let you know. Heparin, low molecular weight heparin is more preferred, or you can go for even oral warfarin. By and large, oral warfarin is utilized in a person where there are chronic thromboembolic phenomena. IVC filter, if there is a contraindication for anticoagulation, then go for IVC filter. Thrombolysis is very commonly preferred in a person who has got a massive embolus and cardiogenic shock. Surgical procedures, you can have sometime what we call as a surgical intervention like pulmonary embolectomy if it is a massive and person has gone in a cardiogenic shock. So by and large, in a massive pulmonary embolism, thrombolysis with embolectomy, two things together. In submassive, thrombolysis, embolectomy, and further management. In a non-massive, usually we don't require thrombolysis, mainly anticoagulation is a treatment. Now these are all the different charts which are being there. Hemodynamically stable, hemodynamically unstable. Hemodynamically unstable means massive and submassive infarcts. By and large, a massive infarct. If it is hemodynamically stable, try to identify, and then depending upon that you can go for anticoagulation, IVC filter, etc. depending upon that, or you can go for anticoagulation, IVC filter, and for RV dysfunction, go for, you can consider thrombolysis also. While in an unstable variety, thrombolysis should be followed by, or thrombolysis with embolectomy is the most common, or you can go for anticoagulation followed by IVC filter. All those treatments are there. You can go through your at leisure time what are the different parameters and what is the treatment you can advise them. These are all the different charts, flow charts we call. At your leisure time you can go through. There are many charts you can go through at your leisure time. All different algorithms depending upon. This is a typical IVC filter. You can see that this is put in a inferior vena cava. These are the different shapes of IVC filter. Advantage, it will block the clot and it will prevent the embolism. But at the same time, this will become a site for formation of a thrombus. So you have to decide, and as soon as the person is, DVT is controlled, you can remove this IVC filter. So it should not be kept in inferior vena cava for a long time. If there is a massive embolus in pulmonary artery and person is in a cardiogenic shock, that embolus should be removed. We call it a pulmonary embolectomy. So if you remove from pulmonary artery a big clot, that is also use the word endarterectomy. You can have a complication secondary due to deep vein thrombosis we call as a phlegmasia cerula dolens, that is venous gangrene, and then you require a treatment for the deep vein thrombosis. For prevention, low molecular weight heparin or heparin is one of the treatment, or you can go for surgical interventions, and during surgical intervention you will have to use low molecular weight heparin, and when there is a massive surgery, major surgery done during orthopedic surgery also, you will have to give prophylactically low molecular weight heparin. Also in oncosurgery, neurosurgery or thoracic surgery also that is useful. As far as complication of pulmonary embolism is concerned, pulmonary infarct, in case of a massive infarct or massive pulmonary embolism, severe pulmonary hypertension, congestive cardiac failure with a shock stage, and it will be producing acute cor pulmonale. By and large, a chronic cor pulmonale will be common in a person who is developing a chronic thromboembolic phenomena. Acute respiratory failure will be more common with an acute cor pulmonale and cardiogenic shock. Massive hemoptysis will be there in any variety of, by and large it will be more common with an massive embolus or submassive embolus. Tachycardia, tachypnea will be more common with a submassive and minor, and that will be more common in a massive variety rather than other groups. So sudden cardiac death, pulseless electrical activity, atrial ventricular tachycardias, tachyarrhythmias, atrial flutter fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, secondary pulmonary arterial hypertension, severe hypoxia, and right to left intracardiac shunts, etc. will be a common mechanism producing acute cor pulmonale and cardiogenic shock. So I'll end my lecture here. So I hope this lecture will be helpful to you. Once in a while you will see this pulmonary embolism case. If it is in your mind, you can suspect and you can investigate, and if you suspect early, treat them early, you will prevent mortality, that is death.